Hi, my name is Hill and I am a Pinoy doctor working as a junior doctor in the UK. I would like to share with you my experience of working to become a doctor in the UK from the Philippines. My unique story is that I started to work as a nurse in the UK, and then I worked on becoming a licensed doctor while working as a nurse in the UK. So we'll start with what happened before the pandemic and why I decided to come to the UK. As a nursing graduate back in the days, I was one of those who studied nursing primarily with the hopes of being able to go abroad. So the options were, of course, US, Australia, Canada, and possibly other countries as well. But I was also those back in 2008 that didn't really have the capacity to go abroad. It was those days that we had to do volunteer work for at least 1 year.
You
Some
what?
did it for 2 years or more. And I just couldn't afford to do that. And I wasn't financially capable as well of paying loads of money to, for example, to become a student in countries like Canada or Australia to sort of bridge from being a Filipino nurse to a Canada or an Australian nurse, for example. So I ended up going to medical school, had a scholarship, and became a doctor in 2018. But even after I became a doctor, I always had the desire in me to go abroad like my nurse friends. I was already a doctor, but I see a lot of my batchmates in nursing who were already thriving abroad, able to build a house, able to build a family. There I was, still starting as a young doctor in the Philippines. But I was also one of those people who dreamed of going abroad. So since I was already a doctor, I initially explored the possibilities for doctors to work abroad. So of course, again, the number one choice would be the US. I found the US process already very daunting and difficult. I knew back then that I had to take the USMLE, which is known to be a very difficult exam. And at that point, I didn't have the energy and the drive to sit another exam, having just passed the board exam, which was already a lot. And I said that was enough for me during that time. Another option was Australia. Australia is one of those dream countries for persons like me who love the outdoors, who love the weather, very similar to the Philippines in some parts of Australia. And I started to explore it. I started to search the web and how the process would be, and I just got dizzy looking at the process. I thought it was too complicated for me. Again, I didn't have the energy and the drive at that time. So I have this friend who was also a nurse back in 2012. Before I went to medical school, I worked as a copy editor in one of the PPO companies in the Philippines, and I had this colleague who was also a nurse who started to become a speech and language pathologist. And after studying 1 year, taking up a master's degree in speech and language therapy, which was changed to master's in communication disorders back then. After studying 1 year, she was able to go to the US and work as a speech and language therapist, and she had a good life with that career in the US. So I thought, why not do that? Study to become a speech and language pathologist, and then go to the US, and then when I reach the US, I will shift to becoming a doctor, hoping that I will have or I will regain the momentum, the energy, and the drive to take the most dreaded US MLE to become a doctor in the US. And so, pre pandemic in 2019, I took up some education units in one of the schools in my hometown, Dominguez City, which was the prerequisite to be able to study masters in communication disorders, which was the prerequisite to become a speech and language pathologist in the US. And so I started in 2019 and finished in March 2020. And we all know what happened in 2020, March 2020 specifically. It was when the pandemic was declared. And so you can imagine the effect of that on my plan. I was supposed to study Masters in Communication Disorders in Cebu, and I was from Dumaguete, which is an island adjacent to Cebu. And of course, in order to be able to go to Cebu to do that, I would have to ride a boat. And we all know that that was not possible during that time because of lockdown. And so because of that, all of my plans totally changed. I thought that I was already in the direction of going to the US, but then again, it happened. The US was not very short. So I let go of that dream. We didn't know when the pandemic would end, and I had to start thinking of plan B and plan C and so forth. And so I stayed in my hometown during the height of the pandemic. And fast forward to around the end of 2020, when the pandemic was already slowly slowing down. I met with one of my friends who was also a doctor, and she introduced me to the possibility of becoming a doctor in the UK. And my initial reaction was that it sounded like it was very possible, it was very feasible, and it was relatively easy compared to going to the US, Australia, or Canada. And so I went for it. So in early 2021, what I did was take IELTS first. I felt that IELTS was the rate limiting step to starting to work on the dream of becoming a UK doctor. So I said to myself that if I reached the minimum required score for IELTS to become a doctor in the UK, and then it must be for me. And lo and behold, I reached the cutoff of the IELTS after reviewing for around 5 months. To be able to get that score, I proceeded with the process. But then I figured that if I wanted to pursue this pathway, it would require me to spend my estimate was around 500 to 600,000 pesos from IELTS to passing plan 2 and finally obtaining GMC registration to be able to practice as a doctor in the UK. And I didn't have the money, so I had to be creative. I knew I had to be creative. I knew I had to make a very, very clear and practical plan to do it. I was one of those nurses, even if I was already a doctor, that was a fan of Nurse Even. I always watched his vlogs. As a doctor, I was always a little bit close with the nurses. I always became friends with them and interacted with them. And so I had this crazy idea. I tried to apply as a nurse in the UK. I was a licensed nurse, and funny enough, months before having that crazy idea, for some unknown reason, I renewed my nursing license for the first time in 10 years. I didn't know why. I just wanted to have another ID, another valid ID. But it sort of confirmed that that crazy idea was indeed possible. And it was that time that the UK was in a lot of need for nurses. Brexit just happened, and so a lot of the Europeans who were working in the UK had to go back to their homelands because of Brexit, and the UK was short of nurses, not to mention the effects of the pandemic. So I asked my nurse friends how to apply to become a nurse in the UK. So the concept was, if I go to the UK as a nurse, I would be able to work as a nurse. And while working as a nurse, I had two purposes. First is to become familiar with the UK healthcare system, to be able to help me pass the exams, namely PLAB 1 and PLAB 2. Secondly, so that I will save on all the expenses. Being already in the UK, I wouldn't have to travel to and fro UK and the Philippines to take the exams, or to go to the review center for PLAB 2, which are only found in the UK. And so they told me about these agencies who help nurses to get a job as a nurse in the UK. And so I searched a couple of these agencies. I sent them emails, I sent them messages in their Facebook pages, and voila, one of them entertained me, even if I did not have any nursing experience. I did not have any nursing experience ever, even for a day. My only winning points were my valid nursing license and my IELTS score, which was of course also valid for nurses. And so one of the agencies invited me for an interview, and so that was August 2021 when I was scheduled for an interview to become a nurse in the UK. I was at home. It was an online interview. I thought initially that it was only a sort of a screening for me to be able to proceed with the application process. But to my surprise, it was already the actual job interview. I was interviewed by one of the ward managers in the hospital in the UK. I will not talk about the interview in detail. I will probably talk about it separately in another video the next day after the interview. To my surprise, to my family's surprise, to everyone's surprise, to heaven's surprise, I got the job to work as a nurse in the UK, even without nursing experience. And they wanted me to start as soon as possible. The only thing that I lacked was CBT, which is a computer-based test, which is part of the licensure exams to become a nurse in the UK, which could be done in the Philippines. I was supposed to take the CBT in Manila before October, but there was a typhoon that caused the exam to be cancelled, and thus my trip to the UK was overall delayed. And so I rebooked the exam. I booked it this time in Cebu, and I booked it in October. And then luckily I passed the CBT after one take, and so they wanted me to start right away.
Wow.
In fact, they asked me to fly to the UK in December, and so I flew to the UK 3rd December. I arrived in the UK December 2, 2021, and that was also when my contract as a nurse started. So December 2021 to 2022, then to 2023, that was when I worked as a nurse in the UK. To be exact, I worked in the UK for 1 year and 11 months. Again, my main purpose of working as a nurse in the UK was firstly to be familiar with the UK healthcare system, and secondly, of course, to fund all my exams, all my reviews for the UK doctor's licensure exam, namely PLAB 1 and PLAB 2. And so I did that. Before I came to the UK, I actually already had a schedule for PLAB 1. It took me months to be able to complete that. I will not talk specifically about my PLAB 1 journey. I will probably talk about it in another video if any of you are interested. And then luckily I passed PLAB 1, and then I took PLAB 2 in May 2023, and I passed it as well. And after a very complicated process of completing GMC registration, I was finally fully registered with the GMC in July 2023. And so I started to apply to become a doctor while I was still working as a nurse. But then initially I found it difficult to get a job as a doctor in the UK. I've already sent a couple of applications, probably around 30. I waited from July, August, September, October. I waited 3 months and I didn't get a job yet. I thought, this is getting a little bit uncertain. And so I decided in October 2023 to leave my nursing job and go back to the Philippines, because I was a bit worried that if I stayed too long in nursing, I will be out of date in terms of my knowledge and skills as a doctor. And so I decided to leave my nursing career, and so I went back home to the Philippines in October 2023. But as soon as I arrived in the Philippines during the same week, I was shortlisted for an interview in one of the hospitals in Wales. And after that, I had 2 more invitations for interview, including the same hospital that I worked with as a nurse. So to cut the story short, I got accepted in 2 of those hospitals that I mentioned, one in Wales and the other one is the same hospital that I worked with as a nurse. But in the end, for practicality reasons, I chose to accept the job offer in the hospital that I worked with as a nurse. So fast forward, I started working as a doctor in the UK in February 2024. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so that I can upload summer videos about probably about my life as a nurse for 1 year and 11 months in the UK, my journey as well, and probably about my life as a doctor in the UK.